You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Data protection is a top priority with today's work-from-home workforce. However, current data loss prevention tools inadequately protect data in cloud or SaaS offerings from insider threats. Secure Circle automatically protects data as it leaves SaaS services such as GitHub, AWS, and Salesforce. The protection is transparent to users and works with any application to persistently protect data, even source code. Secure your data with Secure Circle's Zero Trust Data Protection. Begin your 30-day free trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Secure Circle. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. If you missed it, Security Weekly Unlocked, that is, you can now access all of the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not, by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked, clicking either the button to register or the button to log in. This segment is sponsored by Imperva. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Imperva. Joining us today from Imperva is Senior Director of Data Security, Chris Brown, where we'll be talking about, well, guess what? Data security. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Chris, it's nice to have you on. It's interesting when Chris and I were talking, I believe it was yesterday, there was an acquisition that brought you over to Imperva. Was it JSonar? If I get that, did I get that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it focused on database security. And it was kind of funny. I was talking about some of my experiences with database security, and I'm like, I can see people falling into a whole bunch of traps, right? And now with the cloud, just being able to spin up databases so easily, I click that little checkbox and I go, oh yeah, encrypt my database. And people going, yeah, I'm done. Like I did database security. I'm good, right? There's more to it than that, though.
Yeah, no, it's the easy button, right? You just push that and away you go. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot more to it, particularly in terms of really understanding what's happening within these environments and having the appropriate level of visibility to understand this. And at JSonar, we had been focused on the database security space for quite some time and anticipated some of the cloud challenges quite a few years ago, and architected our solution to address this because it's unique in many regards. It's unique in the new diversity of databases, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, even how you go about collecting data to establish that level of oversight. And it's really been, I think, a shock for many organizations to realize that, oh, there's a whole new frontier here on the cloud side that I have to get my arms around, where it was already a pretty challenging frontier in the traditional models.
Yeah, I also feel like that database security doesn't get enough attention. And Chris actually asked me this. He flipped the interview around when we were prepping, right? And I was like, I think it kind of takes a back seat because your front of your application, whether you're in React or whatever your framework is, gets more attention because that's where you believe most of the attack surface is. To a certain extent, that might be true. That's where you're putting a lot of effort into making it usable. This is where your users are interacting with it, and we're trying to focus security around that. When you get kind of deeper into the application, all the way back to the database, as a developer, when I'm developing, for example, I'm like, yeah, the database is there. Like I can right click on it and access it, do what I need to do. All the rest of it's kind of like black magic. I don't want to touch the database. It kind of just works, right? I'm focusing on what's being presented to the user. Do you find that to be the case as well, Chris, when you talk to your clients? That's why it's not getting attention?
Absolutely the case. And it's why today there's still a very healthy percentage of organizations that haven't yet invested in database security. And I think it's in part because of this scenario that you described, which really doesn't quite solve it, because there's a particular set of security concerns at the application layer that are quite different from concerns at the database layer. And it's the old, why do bank robbers rob banks? It's the same model in the database world. It's the most effective target for large-scale extraction of data.
For sure. And the configuration is also, but I was doing a tutorial online, and it was just amazing. Like, if the database was a few revisions behind and it had this particular configuration, and you could query it and figure out like where it stored files, for example, I could essentially become root on the system. I was like, wow. We talk a lot about preventing cross-site scripting and authentication attacks and things of that nature. But how often are we really digging into, in our meetings with developers, like how the database is secured? I feel like not as often as we should be.
Yeah, and I think it's one of a number of organizational challenges around database security, right? DBAs themselves are, for the most part, focused on performance optimization and applications. Certainly, there's some cycles allocated to the security component, but it's generally deferred to another team. And unfortunately, many of those teams that gather the responsibility for it don't have that depth of knowledge and expertise around the databases themselves. And so you're in a bit of a quandary as to, okay, well, where is all this going to be mapped, and how is it really going to be managed in a comprehensive manner? And part of the reason why I think cloud is so frightening in some regards is that, a traditional world was, I have 5 approved databases and I run on-prem. I go to the cloud, I have 25 databases now and 3 different cloud providers and the on-prem. So all of a sudden my problem space got a lot more complicated, making a challenging problem that much harder.
Yeah, it's an interesting progression, because I remember working for a larger enterprise back in the day, and if you need a database, you know, to your point, Chris, you had to go to a DBA, they'd have to spin it up, and that was your database. Now, fast forward to today, years ago in our own application, I came into work one day and I was like, what happened to the database container? Like, where did that go? And they're like, oh, we spun them up in RDS like yesterday. And there they are. And it was the developers that did that. Just spun it right up in the cloud. I was like, oh, our first cloud native service. I'm like, that's exciting, but also very terrifying now, because I don't have as much control, or at least I don't understand how to exercise as much control now, because now it's cloud native.
Yeah, and that same team, the cloud is very new to them. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, in speaking with customers, there have been quite a few scenarios where applications have been stood up in the cloud, and then there's sort of this, oh crap, what about all these controls at the database layer? We need to get them in there, and migrating those controls can be challenging.
Yeah, migrating the tables and the data seems to be the easy part, right? Because cloud providers make that
easy part.
They want to make that easy, so you pay your monthly bill for your database hosting in their services. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that sort of deludes folks relative to, wow, I thought this was going to be a lot harder. Mm-hmm. I moved my data in an afternoon.
Yep.
Like, yeah, but what about everything else?
Yep. Adrian, sorry, Tyler, did you have a comment?
Yeah. So, Chris, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. But it seems to me that one of the other big changes we've seen is a lot of fragmentation in the different types and availability of databases. Like AWS has at least 4 or 5 different database types that you can choose from. Somebody will probably pop in and say, "No, it's a dozen now."
Yeah, it's at least. I think it's at least a dozen.
But we also have, I see applications now that use multiple different kinds of databases at the same time for different purposes. So you might have like an RDS for a main data store and then Redis for session management, for example. So are those additional challenges there too, where, maybe they're securing that main database, but Redis is sitting out there, on distributed across 7 different systems with no password.
Yeah, no, it's a huge problem because of the diversity, and also it's somewhat incompatible with how folks have done database monitoring in the past, right? The old model was install an agent, collect the traffic, and away you go. But now, to your point, you end up with 20 different databases, all the RDS databases. You don't have the ability to install an agent, so you require a different method for capturing that information. And you have to be able to normalize it to a single view of what's really happening across all these different systems. And that has proven to be quite challenging and something that we focused on quite a bit, because at the end of the day, if you look at your security controls and what your objectives are, how important is the fact that it's on RDS Oracle versus Redis or some other database platform? At that point, that's really just metadata. It's not key to how you're approaching this.
So you probably are seeing a pretty rapid growth then in your business, mostly because of the abstraction layer that's required on top of data stores, meaning we have 12 different data stores, right? And so you need an abstraction layer to look at all of those in a uniform, different way. Couple that with, if we take the concept of the data store really truly becoming an application of its own with an API interface, right? You can almost treat the data store like an application. And if you do that, now you got to worry about the infrastructure layer, the host layer, assuming it's got a host. But in the case of cloud native, maybe some of this is abstracted away to the CSP. But it's not just about the data itself. That's a problem. But it's the infrastructure, the configuration, the support layers, everything building up. And then just a sprawling exponential growth of that.
Absolutely. Great point on multiple fronts. Yeah, we were and have been experiencing tremendous growth because of the realization that a new approach is required. And we think of it as separating the sensor layer from the intelligence layer. And there's going to be continued growth in the diversity of sensors, even beyond that scope of the database as an application. But even under that umbrella, think about it's not just the monitoring. You do have to understand the underlying vulnerabilities in the server itself, or find the databases to start with, right? It's still a problem today of where are all these databases that have sensitive data? How do I classify it? How do I manage who's accessing it? And historically, folks have really focused on the monitoring part, but I consider that one of 5 different pillars that for a comprehensive strategy need to be addressed. And some of those pillars may come from a variety of sources. You see a lot of focus on classification today. It's a big problem. And for that to be solved, it's going to be solved at different tiers within the organization, both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach.
Hell, I think you could take this all the way down even to just a basic discovery offering, just discovering what's out there, right? And to a point that you made in the previous segment, Paul, this is really a threat landscape problem when we start to talk about the explosion of data stores.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
and of
gets
course,
away from
on
you,
top
right?
of all this, go ahead, Paul.
I was just saying, like when I have a container and it has a database in it, I can manage that in my CI/CD pipeline. I can update it and all that stuff. Once it moved into RDS, I was like, how do I monitor it? How do I make sure it's on the latest version? And then now I've got multiple databases because with a few clicks, I can create new ones. And then now they're in different VPCs. Maybe they're going across different regions. And now I'm like, how do I get a handle on it? I can't anymore without some type of tooling to help me with that.
No, you're absolutely right. And of course, I don't think Amazon's too motivated around solving that because these databases get stood up, then they get forgotten.
Yeah. Until you get the bill.
And away they go. So
been there.
Yeah, you get the bill and maybe that's a clue. But and not only that, but we should also keep in mind that at the database layer, the volumes of transactions and interactions that you're seeing are very substantial. which means that the volume of data that you need to collect is very substantial. And that's been an underlying challenge for traditional approaches to this problem.
Yeah, turning on query
really
logs
motivated us.
I've turned on query logs in the past for a lot of different reasons, right? And then very quickly you're like, I need to turn that off because I can't
it falls
store.
Over.
Right? It falls over. There's performance issues. There's storage issues, especially if you're in the cloud. I'm storing that in the cloud. It gets messy with query logs.
Yeah, I mean, some of our clients are easily hundreds of terabytes of raw data that they store within our system to overcome those types of challenges. And it has a huge impact when you have the ability to do that easily and cost effectively, even to the degree that how do you shape your policy on what you're collecting from an oversight perspective, and how do you move beyond compliance and incorporate more security or even a broader set of use cases, forensics capability, or an operational / DBA capability where you can profile some of the behaviors that you're seeing if you have access to all of this data. And the challenge historically has been just that. Maybe you get a week's worth of data, a day's worth of data. It's not nearly enough data to fully leverage.
In profiling, you're also profiling in the product from a security perspective as well, right? Because it's always been one of my kind of dreams, basically. I haven't done it in our own application, but reading about it and studying it, I want to know that this application has, similar to the way we do that with HTTP requests on the front end, on the back end, I want to profile that in the database, and then I want to limit that to my application, right? And have those rules. Kind of like I don't want to say WAF, but I mean, I guess I just did, right? But for the back end, for your calls to your database.
Yeah, it's extending similar level of understanding and granular control, specifically at the database tier. And you're absolutely right. That's there's a large subsystem in our solution that is specifically focused on the analytical component and interpreting all of this raw data and being able to transform it into behavior analysis and apply machine learning, AI, all the usual buzzwords to this to fully characterize what's happening today and be able to identify unusual things as they occur in a number of different contexts. I think the scenario that you described at the application level is one, but what about the ability to contrast one DBA to another DBA to see if one is doing something unusual compared to the pool of DBAs over the last 6 months? These types of analysis become accessible when you have the data and you have the analytical wherewithal to sift through all that data.
Yeah, it's a much better approach. I think, Adrian, you might have been in on some of the meetings where we're like, well, we need a larger portion of random people on the internet to be able to access our application, whereas now it's just authenticated users. And I'm like, yeah, let's put that in a totally separate database because I don't trust the database security model to put it in the main database for the rest of the application. And in talking with Chris, I was like, wow, that's really a bad idea. I should probably get a better handle on my database security rather than increasing my attack surface and having another database, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Abstraction, is pretty important there too, and from an AppSec standpoint, parameterizing your requests using stored procedures instead of allowing the application to run ad hoc queries. There's all kinds of strategies there that can reduce, the likelihood that somebody can abuse the database from the application layer. But one of my big challenges doing incident response, and even before I got into security, and I was on the IT side, with visibility, was figuring out who was doing what. Because even back then, before everything was web based, we'd have an application logging into the database, so everybody looked like the prod DB account or whatever account the application logs in with. So tracing that back to one of 1,200 users then becomes kind of challenging if you don't have any monitoring, that can pull together that information and correlate it.
No, it's a great point, and one of the factors in the Imperva acquisition of JSonar, for those of you familiar with Imperva, they've had a very strong presence in the database or the data security domain for quite some time. Not only at the database layer, but also at the application layer, and then even out at the WAF layer. So now with a platform that's capable of capturing all this data, you can solve those types of problems because you have data from, again, different types of sensors that you can link together to have a much more deterministic view as to who this is that's traversing that path.
And there's also, when I've thought of database security, and Adrian, I think you bring up a great point. Sometimes we don't have as much control as we would like over application developers that are like, well, I'm going to use some kind of stored procedure or a layer to structure all of my queries, or I'm going to write them directly. But in front of the database, you can put something that is helping protect that from the application, right? That's part of the product suite, correct?
In terms of a firewall concept, database firewall.
Yeah, like what do you call that? I guess I'm struggling with terminology.
Yeah, database firewall is what I've always heard it called. Yeah.
Yeah, and that capability has Imperva has offered that for a number of years now.
Mm-hmm.
There are some pros and cons around that approach. What I often see with customers is while the concept is very appealing, in practice there are reservations around it because now you're in the direct path between the application and the database.
Right.
And the implications of that, both performance and risk for operational risk, can be high. And so people are torn, yes or no, and it's still a pretty small percentage of customers that use that today.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like the one of the huge benefits, right? You talked about multiple terabytes of being able to collect and analyze those logs. That has much less operational risk and much less performance risk as you're monitoring those logs and giving people visibility. They can do operational and performance queries as well as looking at it from a security perspective.
Yeah, and plus in general, it's just much easier than traditional approaches. When you move to an agentless model, that's how you solve for the diversity of databases, the dynamics of the environment, the ability to quickly add new data stores into the model, and pull all of that together into that unified view. And database monitoring in general, it's been a challenge on the operational management side of the tools themselves in many scenarios, because as you start to collect more data, and you described this earlier, you start to put a strain on the system, or you're managing rules and policies, et cetera, and it just becomes very, very high overhead for achieving that. But when you shift the model to say, okay, I can collect more data, and I now have an opportunity to make a decision based on this larger volume of data post-collection, as opposed to at the point of collection, it gives you a lot more latitude.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
You bet. Thanks for the great discussion.
Folks that want to learn more can visit securityweekly.com/Imperva. Stay tuned. Coming up next, our friends from TriMark will be here to discuss SolarWinds, among other things. Stay tuned.